The sound of the pen scratching against the paper sounded like a guillotine blade dropping. I was on my hands and knees under the massive mahogany conference table, frantically buffing a scuff mark on the floor. My knees ached, and the smell of lemon polish was making my head spin. Above me, Hawthorne Sterling, the cruelest man in real estate, was signing away his empire. "To my niece, Blythe," he declared. His voice was deep and sounded like gravel grinding together. "I designate her as the sole beneficiary and CEO of Sterling Global. Since my disappointing son is dead, she is the last of the bloodline. She is the only one worthy of the Sterling name." Blythe let out a greedy, high-pitched laugh that made my skin crawl. I could see her expensive red high heels vibrating with excitement just inches from my face. "Finally," she sneered, "I will take this company to heights Stellan never could. He was too soft." Hawthorne didn't respond to the mention of his dead son. Instead, he shifted his weight and kicked out his heavy leather boot. It slammed into my yellow cleaning bucket. The bucket tipped, and dirty, gray water sloshed out, soaking into the thick carpet and splashing onto his handmade Italian shoes. "Get this trash out of my sight," he roared, looking down at me with pure disgust. "Today is about greatness and worthy bloodlines. It is not a day for the help to be underfoot. You are staining the air in this room, girl." I scrambled back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was terrified. In my rush to pull the bucket away, the thin silver chain around my neck caught on the edge of the heavy mahogany table. I felt a sharp tug, and the cheap clasp of my silver locket snapped. The locket flew from my neck. It slid across the highly polished surface of the table, spinning like a coin. It didn't stop until it hit Hawthorne's hand, resting directly under the tip of his fountain pen. The impact forced the locket to spring open. Hawthorne froze. The room went silent. Staring up at him from the tiny, wrinkled photo inside the locket were 3 toddler boys. They were identical triplets, and they were smiling. But it wasn't just the smiles that caught his breath. It was their eyes. They had the unmistakable, rare, genetic Sterling violet eyes, a trait that had appeared in every firstborn Sterling male for a century. My name is Verity, and the man who just called me trash didn't realize he just signed away his grandson's birthright to the woman who killed their father. Hawthorne Sterling stopped breathing for a moment. The pen in his hand hovered over the paper, a single drop of black ink falling like a tear onto the legal document. He reached out with a shaking hand and picked up the small, silver heart. He stared at the 3 tiny faces in the photo. He recognized those eyes immediately. They hadn't appeared in the family for 3 generations until his late son, Stellan, was born. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. His voice was no longer a roar. It was thin and brittle. He looked at me, and for the first time in the 3 years I had worked at Sterling Tower, he actually saw me. He wasn't looking through me like I was a piece of furniture. Blythe sensed the shift in the room. She saw the way her uncle was looking at the maid, and she saw the tiny photo. Her face turned pale for a second before she masked it with a look of pure hatred. She reached out and snatched the irrevocable succession deed off the table, clutching it to her chest. "It doesn't matter, Uncle," she gloated. Her voice was sharp and desperate. "You signed it. The witnesses have seen it. It is done. The company is mine now, and there is nothing you can do to take it back." She turned her venomous gaze toward me. "As for you, you thieving little mouse, how dare you carry around photos of Sterling heirs? Did you steal those from Stellan's personal files before he died? Or is this some sick fantasy?" I tried to speak, but my throat felt like it was full of sand. I reached for my locket, but Hawthorne held it tight in his fist. "Security," Blythe screamed, not waiting for an answer. "Remove this clumsy maid immediately, and take my uncle out too. He clearly isn't feeling well. He's becoming delusional in his old age." The heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. 2 large men in black suits grabbed my arms and yanked me to my feet. Hawthorne looked at me, then at the deed in Blythe's hands. I saw the moment of realization hit him. He looked like a man who had just realized he had walked off a cliff. He had just disinherited his own resurrection to protect a legacy that was now in the hands of a monster. The security guards didn't be gentle. They dragged me through the plush hallways of the executive floor, past the glass offices where people I had cleaned for looked away in embarrassment. They threw me out the back service exit, near the loading docks where the trash was collected. I landed hard on the cold pavement. I clutched my chest where the locket used to be, hyperventilating. My mind was racing. I had spent years being invisible, making sure no one knew about the boys. I had worked 3 jobs, scrubbed floors, and lived in the shadows to keep them safe. Now, the secret was out. I had to run. If Hawthorne knew about Cashin, Ford, and Ridge, he would try to take them. He was a man who collected things, and he would see them as his property. But even worse was Blythe. If she knew there were rightful heirs who could challenge her claim to the billions, she would do anything to keep her power. She had always been jealous of Stellan. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward the bus stop. My blue uniform was still wet with dirty cleaning water, and I smelled like bleach. I felt small and broken. As I waited for the bus, a black town car screeched to a halt in front of the building's main entrance. I watched in shock as Hawthorne Sterling, the man who owned half the city, was physically escorted out of his own building. Blythe's private security team held his arms. They didn't care about his legacy or his age. To them, he was just a man who no longer held the checkbook. He looked old. For the first time, he didn't look like a titan of industry. He looked defeated and furious. As he stood on the sidewalk, his eyes scanned the street. He saw me sitting on the bench at the bus stop. Our eyes locked through the grimy glass of the bus window as the vehicle pulled away. He wasn't looking at me like a maid anymore. He was looking at me like a map. He knew I was the only person who held the key to what he had lost. I pulled my jacket tight around me and looked away. I wasn't a map. I was a mother, and I was going to protect my sons from the Sterling name at any cost. I raced home as fast as the bus could take me. My heart didn't stop thumping until I reached the tenement district. This part of the city was a maze of peeling paint, broken streetlights, and the smell of fried food and exhaust. It was a world away from the mahogany and marble of Sterling Tower. I took the stairs 2 at a time to my tiny apartment on the 4th floor. When I burst through the door, my neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was sitting on the floor with the boys. "Mama," the boys shouted in unison. Cashin, Ford, and Ridge dropped their wooden blocks and ran toward me. I knelt down and hugged them so tight they grumbled. Looking at them, I saw Stellan's face reflected in 3 different ways. I also saw the violet eyes that had caused so much trouble today. "We have to go, Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice shaking. "I need to pack their things. Something happened at work." "Verity, dear, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," the old woman said, looking worried. "Worse," I muttered. I started grabbing small shirts and socks, stuffing them into a duffel bag. I didn't have a plan, but I knew we couldn't stay here. My employment records had my address. Blythe would find me. Suddenly, a heavy pounding shook the front door. The sound was so loud that the boys jumped and hid behind my legs. My blood ran cold. I grabbed a dull kitchen knife from the counter and stood in front of my children. "Go away," I screamed at the door. "I'll call the police." "Open the door, Verity," a voice came through the wood. It wasn't the loud, booming command I was used to hearing in the boardroom. It was Hawthorne's voice, but it was different. It was quiet, strained, and almost sounded like a plea. "Please, Blythe has frozen my accounts. I have nowhere to go, and we need to talk about my son. We need to talk about Stellan." I stood frozen. The man who had spent his life stepping on people was outside my door, asking for help. I looked at my sons, then at the door. I knew that if I opened it, my life would never be the same. I walked forward and turned the deadbolt. I opened the door only a few inches, keeping the chain on. Hawthorne Sterling was standing in the dim, flickering light of the hallway. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie was gone, and his hair was messy. In his hand, he held a brown paper bag with a bottle of cheap whiskey he must have bought at the corner store. "I have no one else to turn to," he said, looking at the floor. "Blythe has taken everything. The cars, the houses, the access. She moved faster than I ever thought she would." I stared at him for a long beat before unhooking the chain. "Come in," I said coldly, "but if you move toward the boys, I will use this knife." Hawthorne walked into my tiny living room. He looked around at the peeling wallpaper and the cramped space with a look of mild disgust, but then his eyes landed on the triplets. They were standing by the sofa, watching him with wide, curious eyes. Cashin, the oldest by 3 minutes, stepped forward. He crossed his arms and frowned. It was the exact same frown Hawthorne wore when he was annoyed. The old man gasped and fell to his knees on my rug. The whiskey bottle clinked against the floor. "They are real," he whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "Stellan's boys, they look just like him when he was a toddler, the eyes. I thought I would never see those eyes again." "Don't touch them," I snapped, moving between him and the kids. "You don't get to act like a proud grandfather now. You treated Stellan like dirt. You drove him away because he wanted to build things for people instead of just taking their money. You didn't care about him when he was alive. You don't get to claim them now." Hawthorne looked up at me, and for the first time I saw a break in his armor. "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I was a fool. I thought strength was about being hard, but Blythe, she isn't just hard, she is hollow. She didn't just inherit the company today, Verity. She's going to liquidate it. She's selling the legacy for parts. And if she finds out about these heirs, she will ensure they never reach adulthood. She won't let 3 toddlers stand between her and $5 billion. We sat at my wobbly kitchen table while the boys played quietly in the corner. I gave Hawthorne a glass of water, refusing to let him open his whiskey in my house. He explained the legal nightmare he had created. "The irrevocable succession deed is ironclad," Hawthorne said, rubbing his face with his hands. "I wrote it myself to make sure Stellan's distant cousins couldn't sue for the company. I made it so no one could undo it. Legally, Blythe owns Sterling Global. She has the power of attorney over all the assets." He looked at me with a spark of the old tycoon returning to his eyes. "However, there is one thing she doesn't know. Stellan was a genius. He was always better at the technical side than I was. He was working on a separate patent, a new kind of clean energy technology, right before he died in that accident." My heart skipped a beat. "He told me about it," I whispered. "He said it would change the world. He said it would make Sterling Global a company that helped people instead of just building skyscrapers for the rich." "Exactly," Hawthorne said. "If that patent wasn't filed under the Sterling Global name, but under a private shell company instead, Blythe doesn't own it. The deed only covers what was part of the corporation today. Anything outside of it belongs to the heirs." "He did file it separately," I interrupted, feeling a surge of hope. "He called it Project Trinity. He told me he named it for the boys. He said it was their future." Hawthorne's face transformed. He didn't just smile. He looked like a shark that had caught the scent of blood. "Then we have a weapon. If we can prove the boys own that technology, we can bankrupt Sterling Global by withholding the licenses they need to operate. But I need your help, Verity. Stellan hid the files. I need to find the encryption key, and I bet he left it with you." I looked at the small silver locket sitting on the table. Stellan had given it to me a week before he died. "I think I know where it is," I said. The reality of our situation set in as the sun began to rise. Hawthorne Sterling, a man who usually slept on silk sheets in a penthouse, had to stay on my lumpy futon. He looked ridiculous in his silk shirt, trying to find a comfortable position on the flat cushions. The next morning, the billionaire's maid was gone, and the billionaire's roommate took her place. I made him a cup of instant coffee. He took one sip and made a face like he was drinking poison. "This tastes like mud and chemicals," he complained, staring into the mug. "Is this what you people actually drink?" "It's all we can afford, Hawthorne," I said, leaning against the counter. I felt a strange sense of power. For years, I had been the one serving him, never allowed to speak. Now, he was in my world. "Maybe if you paid your cleaning staff a living wage, I would have better beans in the cupboard. You spend more on a pair of socks than I make in a month." He went silent. He looked at the coffee, then at the triplets who were sharing a small bowl of oatmeal. He saw the way I carefully measured out the milk to make it last. He saw the holes in the boys' socks. "I never thought about it," he admitted quietly. "I thought as long as the company was growing, the world was fine. I didn't see the people under the floors I walked on." "Well, now you're one of us," I said. "So drink your mud. We have work to do." He sipped the coffee again. This time, he didn't complain. He just watched the boys. The lesson of how the other half lived was beginning, and for a man like Hawthorne, it was the hardest lesson of all. But I saw him look at Cashin, who was trying to fix a broken toy truck, and I saw a flicker of genuine respect in the old man's eyes. He was seeing the sterling grit in a child who had nothing. We didn't have much time to bond. The news was already reporting on the new era of Sterling Global. We turned on my small, fuzzy television to see Blythe standing in front of a bank of microphones. She looked polished and cold. "Today, we are streamlining the company," Blythe announced. Her voice was smooth, but I could hear the greed underneath. "We are selling off the Sterling Manufacturing Division to the Vane Corporation. We are moving away from making things and focusing on pure investment." Hawthorne stood up so fast he nearly knocked over the kitchen table. "The Vane Corporation? They are asset strippers. They'll fire every worker, sell the machines for scrap, and close the factories within a month. Thousands of families will be on the street." "She's gutting the fish just to get the roe," I muttered, watching the screen. I knew people in those factories. I had cousins who worked the line. "She doesn't care about the legacy, she just wants the cash now." "We have to stop that sale," Hawthorne said, packing the small room. "If that sale goes through, she'll have enough liquid cash to hire a private army. She'll be untouchable. We need to hit her where it hurts before she signs the final papers." "How?" I asked. "You're a fugitive in her eyes, and I'm just a maid." "We need to crash the stock price," Hawthorne said, his eyes turning cold and calculated. "Investors hate scandal and they hate risk. If we can show them that Blythe is a liability, that she's hiding secrets, the board will hesitate. We need the safety reports she buried last year, the ones regarding the West Side Development Project." "I know where those are," I said. "They are in the physical archives. They never put them on the cloud because they were too dangerous." "Then we have a mission," Hawthorne said. "But we have to be careful. If we're caught, we go to jail and Blythe wins everything." The Sterling Tower felt different at midnight. It was a giant of glass and steel that seemed to watch the city with cold eyes. My heart was thumping against my ribs as I walked toward the service entrance. I was wearing my blue janitor's uniform, carrying my mop and bucket. It was my best disguise. Hawthorne was sitting in my old car around the corner, linked to me through a cheap earpiece. "I checked the system from a public library computer earlier," he whispered. "Blythe hasn't updated the janitorial security codes yet. She's too busy looking at the penthouse furniture to care about the basement." I swiped my badge. The light turned green. I slipped inside. "Take the service elevator to the sub-basement," Hawthorne instructed. "Go left at the corridor. Stay low. The security guard, Arthur, takes his break at 12:15. You have a 10-minute window." I felt like a spy in a movie, but instead of a silenced pistol, I was clutching a feather duster. Every creak of the building made me jump. I reached the archive room, a cold, dusty place filled with rows of metal filing cabinets. "Looking for the West Side Development file," I whispered. "Red folder, marked confidential legal." I found it. I opened the folder and gasped. It contained photos of cracked foundations and memos from engineers warning that the building wasn't safe. Blythe had signed off on the construction anyway to save $10 million. She had risked hundreds of lives for a bonus. "I have it," I said. "Get out of there, Verity, now," Hawthorne urged. I stuffed the files into my cleaning cart and walked out just as the elevator dinged. I kept my head down, mopping a spot on the floor that didn't exist as the security guard walked past. He didn't even look at me. To him, I was just a part of the building. I was invisible, and for the first time in my life, I was glad for it. The next morning, the world of Sterling Global exploded. We had spent the night scanning the documents and sending them to every major news outlet in the country. We used anonymous encrypted emails from a local internet cafe. By 9:00 a.m., the story broke. "Sterling Global's new CEO ignored fatal safety risks," the headlines screamed. The stock price didn't just dip, it plummeted. It dropped 20% in the first hour of trading. The Vane Corporation released a statement saying they were reevaluating the purchase of the manufacturing division. We watched the news from my apartment. Blythe appeared on the screen, leaving her car. She looked furious. Her hair was messy, and her eyes were wide with panic. She was surrounded by reporters screaming questions at her. "This is a smear campaign," she shouted into the cameras. "These documents are forgeries. We are investigating the source of this illegal leak. I know it's you, Uncle. I know you're behind this." She looked right into the camera, and for a second, it felt like she was looking directly at us in our tiny living room. "I'm coming for you, Hawthorne, and I'm coming for that girl. You've made a huge mistake." Hawthorne chuckled, a dark, satisfied sound. He leaned back on my lumpy sofa and took a sip of his mud coffee. "Come and get me, you witch," he whispered to the screen. "You've always been good at spending money, Blythe, but you never learned how to fight for it. I've been fighting since I was 20. "We've bought some time," I said, feeling a mix of triumph and fear. "But now she's desperate, and desperate people are the most dangerous." "She's a cornered animal," Hawthorne agreed. "But we have the bait. Now we just need to set the trap." While I worked my second job at the diner to keep food on the table, Hawthorne did something I never thought I'd see. The billionaire stayed home and watched the triplets. I was terrified the first time I left them alone with him, but we had no choice. I came home after an 8-hour shift, my feet aching and my apron covered in grease. I expected to find the apartment in ruins and Hawthorne complaining. Instead, the room was quiet. I walked into the living room and froze. Hawthorne was sitting on the floor with his back against the sofa. Ford and Ridge were fast asleep, curled up on his chest like two little puppies. He was holding a copy of the Wall Street Journal, and he was reading it in a low, rhythmic voice to Cashin. "And that, Cashin, is why the hedge fund failed," Hawthorne whispered. "They over-leveraged their assets in a bear market. Never do that. Always keep a reserve." Cashin looked up at him and let out a little babble, pointing at a graph on the page. "He understands the market fluctuations," Hawthorne insisted when he saw me. He spoke in a whisper so he wouldn't wake the other two. "He actually cooed at the NASDAQ report. He has a natural instinct for numbers." "He's too, Hawthorne," I said, tired but smiling. I set down my bag. "He probably just likes the colors of the lines." "He's a Sterling," Hawthorne corrected me, his voice full of a strange kind of pride. "He's brilliant. They all are. They have Stellan's curiosity and my chin." For the first time, I didn't see the tycoon who had fired hundreds of people. I saw a grandfather. He was looking at those boys not as heirs to a fortune, but as human beings. The Sterling curse, the coldness that had ruined his relationship with his son, seemed to be melting in the heat of a tiny, cramped apartment. Late that night, after the boys were tucked into their shared bed, Hawthorne sat at my kitchen table with Stellan's old laptop. We had finally managed to get past the first layer of security. Hawthorne had spent hours typing in different combinations of dates and names. Suddenly, the screen blinked. A single audio file appeared on the desktop. It was titled, "For Verity, If I Don't Make It." My hand shook as I reached for the play button. Stellan's voice filled the room. It was warm and familiar, but it was laced with a fear I had never heard when he was alive. "Verity, if you're listening to this, it means my hunch was right," Stellan's voice said. There was the sound of a car engine in the background. "Blythe has been pressuring the mechanic at the Sterling Labs. I found out she's been paying him under the table. I think she's trying to cut the brake lines on the prototype I'm testing today. She's been talking about eliminating the competition for the inheritance. If anything happens to me, please, Verity, take the boys and run. Don't trust my father. Don't trust anyone." The recording ended with a sharp, static sound. Hawthorne sat perfectly still. His face went pale, and then it turned a deep, bruised purple. The grief on his face was terrifying. It wasn't just sadness, it was a cold, murderous rage. "It wasn't an accident," he whispered. His voice was trembling. "She killed my son, my only boy. She murdered him for a seat at a table that didn't even belong to her yet." He looked at me, and his eyes were wet. "I pushed him away, Verity. I drove him right into her path because I was too proud to listen to him. I am as much to blame as she is." "No," I said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "She made the choice, but we are going to make her pay for it." Our small moment of peace was shattered the next afternoon. I was coming back from the grocery store with a single bag of milk and bread when I saw a black SUV parked illegally in front of my building. 2 men in suits were standing by the front door. I didn't go in. I stayed back, hiding behind a parked car. I watched as the men used a crowbar to force open the main entrance. My heart stopped. "Hawthorne!" I screamed internally. I didn't dare make a sound out loud. I ran to a payphone around the corner. I didn't want to use my cell phone and be tracked. I dialed the burner phone Hawthorne had bought. "We're not there," Hawthorne's voice came through, sounding sharp and alert. "I saw them coming on the street cameras I linked to my phone. We went out the fire escape 5 minutes ago." "Where are you?" I gasped, my knees shaking. "Are the boys okay?" "We're safe for now," he said. "We're at the old boathouse on the river. It's a property I bought under a fake name years ago for tax reasons. Blythe doesn't know about it, but Verity, she knows. They found the apartment. They saw the 3 cribs. They saw the toys. She knows there are heirs now." "She'll never stop," I said, looking back at my building. I could see the men standing on my balcony, throwing my things into the street. They were looking for us. They were looking for the children. "I know," Hawthorne said. "The hunt is on. We can't stay on the defensive anymore. We have to end this, or we'll be running for the rest of our lives." "What do we do?" I asked. "We go to the one place she can't touch us," he replied. "The annual shareholders' gala. It's in 3 days. It's the only place where the whole world will be watching." The boathouse was cold and damp, smelling of old wood and river water. We spent the next 48 hours like prisoners. Blythe was moving with terrifying speed. She used her power as CEO to freeze my bank account, claiming I had stolen corporate secrets. Then, she did something even more cruel. She filed a report with Child Protective Services, using a falsified police document that said I was a neglectful parent with a history of drug abuse. "She's trying to get the state to take the boys," Hawthorne said, watching the news on a tablet. "If they are in the system, she can use her influence to have them disappear into a foster home she controls. We can't let them near a government official." We barely escaped again when a black car with government plates pulled into the boathouse driveway. We had to scramble through a muddy path in the woods, carrying the boys in our arms. Ridge started crying, and I had to press my hand over his mouth to keep us hidden in the brush. "We have to end this, Hawthorne," I whispered as the car drove away. I was covered in mud, my hair was a mess, and I was exhausted. "I can't keep running with 3 toddlers. They are scared. I am scared." "The gala," Hawthorne said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "It's the only way." At the gala, the board members, the press, and the major investors are all in one room. She can't use her thugs there. She has to play by the rules of the elite, and that's where I'm going to destroy her. "But how do we even get in?" I asked. "We're fugitives." "We don't just get in," Hawthorne said. "We own the room." We spent the final night before the gala working on Stellan's laptop. We finally cracked the final layer of encryption on the Project Trinity files. When the document opened, even Hawthorne gasped. Stellan hadn't just created a patent. He had been much smarter than anyone gave him credit for. He had registered a private holding company called TriStar Industries. He had named the Triplets, Cashin, Ford, and Ridge as the majority shareholders. He had named me, Verity, as the sole trustee and regent until the boys turned 25. But the real shocker was the intellectual property license. Stellan had designed the new Sterling Energy grid, but he had legally leased the rights to Sterling Global for a period that ended yesterday. "Do you see this?" Hawthorne pointed at the screen. "Without a renewal from TriStar Industries, Sterling Global no longer has the legal right to use their own power grid. They are essentially selling empty boxes. Their entire future product line is dead in the water without your signature." I looked at the legal documents. For years, I had walked those halls as a maid, cleaning up after people who wouldn't even look me in the eye. I had worried about paying for milk. I had worried about the rent. "I'm not the maid anymore," I whispered. "No," Hawthorne said, looking at me with a new kind of intensity. You are the most powerful person in the Sterling Empire. You aren't just the mother of the heirs. You are the boss. You are the only person who can save the company or burn it to the ground." "I don't want to burn it," I said, thinking of the workers. "I just want to take it back for Stellan and for the boys." "Then let's get ready," Hawthorne said. "We have a kingdom to reclaim." We needed to walk into that gala and command instant respect. If we looked like fugitives, we would be arrested on sight. Hawthorne called in one last favor. He contacted an old tailor who he had helped start a business 40 years ago. The man met us in secret at a small shop in the city. Hawthorne pulled out his last set of gold and diamond cufflinks, the only things he had managed to grab from his house. "Turn these into cash," he told the tailor, "and get us the best you have." I didn't want a ball gown. I didn't want to look like a princess waiting for a prince. I wanted to look like a leader. The tailor found me a sharp, structured white power suit. It had crisp lines and padded shoulders. When I put it on, I felt like I was wearing armor. I tied my hair back into a sleek, tight bun. Hawthorne trimmed his ragged beard and put on a classic black tuxedo. Even though he was tired, the suit seemed to bring back his old authority. He stood taller. He looked like the titan he used to be. "You look like a queen," he told me, his voice full of genuine admiration. I checked the briefcase that held the TriStar documents and the recording of Stellan. I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't see the tired girl from the tenement. I didn't see the woman scrubbing floors. "No," I said, clicking the briefcase shut. "I look like a CEO. Let's go." We left the Triplets with the tailor's wife, a woman Hawthorne trusted with his life. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, leaving them behind, but I knew it was the only way to ensure they had a future. "Wait for my call," I told her. "If I don't call in 2 hours, take them to the address I gave you." As we drove toward the grand ballroom in a rented black sedan, Hawthorne became quiet. I could see him looking out the window at the city he had built. He seemed to be thinking deeply. "Verity," he said suddenly, "once we win tonight, and we will win, we need to think about the future. The boys will need a proper education. They will need to be shielded from the press. I think it would be best if I took legal guardianship. I can prepare them for the world of business. I can make sure they are ready to lead." I felt a cold chill in my chest. I told the driver to pull over. We stopped in a dark alley 2 blocks from the gala. "No," I said, turning to face him. My voice was like ice. "That is not how this is going to work. I am their mother. I raise them. You can be a grandfather and you can teach them, but you are done being a dictator. You tried to control Stellan and you lost him. If you try to take my sons, I will walk out of this car right now. I will take the patent with me and I will let Sterling Global die. I will let Blythe have the ruins." Hawthorne looked at me, stunned. No one had ever spoken to him like that. He saw the fire in my eyes, the same fire Stellan had. He realized that I wasn't the submissive girl he thought I was. I was a warrior who had survived the streets, and I wasn't afraid of him. After a long silence, he nodded slowly. "Stellan chose well," he whispered. "He chose a woman who was stronger than the Sterling name. You're right, Verity. I've had my turn. I will be the grandfather, you will be the mother, and the boss." "Good," I said. "Now let's go finish this." The gala was a sea of glittering lights, expensive perfume, and the sound of clinking crystal. It was held in the grand ballroom of the plaza, a room filled with the most powerful people in the country. Blythe stood on the stage at the front of the room. She was wearing a blood-red dress that looked like a warning. She held a glass of champagne high in the air, looking triumphant. "Tonight we celebrate the future," she toasted, her voice booming through the speakers. "We dissolve the old, stagnant Sterling ways. Tomorrow, Sterling Global becomes a lean, mean, profit-making machine." The crowd cheered. The board members smiled. It looked like she had won. Suddenly, the massive gold leaf doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. The sound was like a clap of thunder. Every head in the room turned. Hawthorne and I walked in. We didn't rush. We walked with slow, deliberate steps. The press turned their cameras away from the stage. The flashes began to pop like tiny explosions. "He's supposed to be banned," I heard someone whisper. "Is that Hawthorne Sterling? And who is the woman in white?" Blythe's face went from triumphant to ghostly white in a split second. She dropped her champagne glass. It shattered on the stage floor, the sound echoing through the silent room. "Security," she shrieked into the microphone. Her voice was thin and panicked. "These people are trespassers. They are fugitives. Get them out of here now." Hawthorne stepped forward into the light. "I am a trespasser in my own house," he yelled, his voice filling the room without a microphone. "I may be banned, Blythe, but the owner of this company is not." He pointed a finger at me, "And she has something to say." I didn't wait for permission. I walked down the center aisle, the crowd parting for me like the Red Sea. I could feel the eyes of the board members on me, men who had ignored me for years while I emptied their trash cans. I walked up the stairs to the stage. A security guard tried to block me, but Hawthorne grabbed his arm and whispered something in his ear that made the man step back, terrified. I took the microphone from the stand. My hand didn't shake. I looked out at the sea of billionaires and world leaders. "My name is Verity Sterling," I announced. The Sterling name felt heavy on my tongue, but I claimed it. "I am the widow of Stellan Sterling, and I am the regent of TriStar Industries." A murmur went through the room. People began whispering the name TriStar. They knew it was the company that held the patents for the new grid. "As of midnight yesterday," I continued, my voice steady and clear, "the licensing agreement between TriStar and Sterling Global has expired. Blythe Sterling has no legal right to use the technology she just promised to sell to the Vane Corporation. Without my signature, Sterling Global is an empty shell. Its stock is worth nothing." The room erupted into chaos. Shareholders were jumping to their feet, shouting questions. The board members looked at each other in a panic. "You're a lying Maid," Blythe screamed, lunging at me. She tried to grab the microphone, but I stepped aside. "She's a thief. She's trying to scam you all. She's nothing but a cleaning girl who slept with my cousin." I looked at her with pity. "I was the Maid, Blythe. That's how I saw everything you did, and that's how I know you're the real thief." "This is nonsense," Blythe yelled, her face turning a bright, angry purple. "There are no heirs. Stellan died childless. This woman is a fraud." Hawthorne stepped up onto the stage next to me. He looked at the technician in the back of the room, a man who had worked for him for 30 years. Hawthorne gave a single, sharp nod. "And these," Hawthorne boomed, gesturing to the massive IMAX screen behind us, "are the majority shareholders of TriStar Industries. These are the true owners of the Sterling legacy." The screen flickered to life. Instead of the Sterling Global logo, a giant photo of the Triplets appeared. It was a high-resolution shot we had taken at the boathouse. Cashin, Ford, and Ridge were sitting on the grass, looking right at the camera. The entire room went silent. The resemblance was undeniable. They had Stellan's face, but more importantly, they had the violet eyes. In the high-definition light, the purple tint of their irises was clear for everyone to see. It was the Sterling signature, a biological fact that no lawyer could argue with. "The Sterling Triplets," Hawthorne announced, his voice thick with emotion. "My grandsons, the boys Blythe tried to erase." The crowd erupted again, but this time it wasn't confusion, it was a scandal. Reporters were frantically typing on their phones. The Billionaire's Triplets were the story of the century. "It's a trick," Blythe screamed. "They're not his, she probably used colored contacts. Get them off the screen." "We have the DNA results right here, Blythe," I said, holding up a folder. It was another bluff. We were still waiting on the lab, but she didn't know that. "Would you like the press to see them?" "One more thing," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "The succession deed Hawthorne signed was based on a lie. He signed it because he was told he had no heirs. That makes the document fraudulent. But that's not the only lie Blythe told." I looked at the technician again. "Play the file." The ballroom speakers didn't play music this time. They played the sound of a car engine. Then, Stellan's voice filled the room. It was loud, clear, and haunting. "Blythe is pressuring the mechanic. I think she's trying to cut the brake lines. If anything happens to me, Verity, run." The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of 100 people holding their breath. Blythe stood frozen in the center of the stage. The color had completely drained from her face. She looked like a statue made of salt. "That's a fake," she finally choked out. "A deep fake. Technology can do anything these days. You can't prove that's him." "We don't have to prove the voice," I said, leaning in close to the microphone. "Because we have the mechanic. Hawthorne found him yesterday. He's at the police station right now, signing a confession. He's tired of living in fear of you, Blythe." This was the final bluff. We hadn't found the mechanic yet, but Hawthorne knew that if we pushed her hard enough, her own guilt would do the work for us. "He was weak," Blythe suddenly screamed, her voice breaking. She turned to the board members, her eyes wild. "Stellan was going to give it all away. He was going to turn the company into a charity. I saved it. I did what had to be done to keep the Sterling name on top. I'm the only one who had the guts to lead." She had just confessed, on a live microphone, in front of 300 witnesses. The room turned into a riot. People were shouting "murderer" and "traitor." The board members, sensing the wind had changed, moved away from Blythe as if she were radioactive. "You're nothing," Blythe yelled at me, her face twisting into a mask of pure hate. "You're still just the girl who scrubs the floors. You'll never be one of us. You're dirt." I looked down at her red dress, then up at her face. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt a deep, quiet strength. "I'm the woman who just cleaned up your mess, Blythe," I said softly, "and I did a very thorough job." The heavy doors at the back of the room opened again. This time, it wasn't us. It was a squad of police officers in blue uniforms. They marched down the aisle, their handcuffs jingling at their belts. Blythe tried to run, but the shareholders blocked her path. She was trapped on the stage. The lead officer walked up the steps and grabbed her arms. "Blythe Sterling, you are under arrest for the murder of Stellan Sterling and for corporate fraud," he said. As they led her away, she was screaming curses at me, her expensive shoes scuffing against the floor she thought she owned. She looked small. She looked like the trash she had accused me of being. Hawthorne stood next to me, watching her go. He looked like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He turned to the crowd and raised his hand for silence. "The board of directors will meet immediately," he announced. "We have a company to save." The board of directors didn't even go to a private room. They called an emergency session right there on the dance floor, surrounded by the press. They were terrified of the Project Trinity patent being withheld. They knew that if they didn't act now, the company would be bankrupt by morning. "The succession deed is hereby voided due to fraud and criminal activity," the chairman of the board announced. He was a man who had once complained to me that I hadn't dusted his desk properly. Now, he was looking at me with wide, fearful eyes. "We would like to offer the position of CEO back to Hawthorne Sterling," the chairman said, "to restore order and stability to the empire." The crowd began to clap, but Hawthorne held up his hand. He looked at me, then he looked at the giant photo of the triplets on the screen. He looked at the boy's violet eyes. "No," Hawthorne said. His voice was firm. "I am 75 years old. I have spent my life building walls and stepping on people. I was a bad father and I almost lost my grandsons because of my pride. I am retiring, effective immediately." A gasp went through the room. "Then who?" the chairman asked. Hawthorne stepped back and gestured toward me. "The company belongs to the heirs Cashin, Ford, and Ridge, and until they are of age, the law is clear. Their mother, Verity Sterling, is the trustee. She holds the voting power. She holds the patents. She is the regent." He looked at the board members. "If you want the license for the technology, you talk to her. She's the boss now." I stood there, a former maid in a white suit, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I was the center of the world. The 3 months that followed were a whirlwind. We moved out of the tenement and into a secure, comfortable home, not a cold mansion, but a place with a yard where the boys could run. Blythe was in jail, awaiting trial. The mechanic had actually come forward after seeing the gala on the news, confirming our bluff was actually the truth. The Sterling Global stock had stabilized and was higher than ever because the world was excited about the Project Trinity technology. I sat in the CEO's office on the top floor of Sterling Tower. It was Hawthorne's old office with the massive mahogany table, but I had made some changes. I had the heavy velvet curtains removed to let in the sunlight. I had replaced the stiff, uncomfortable chairs with soft ones. And most importantly, I had a large, colorful playpen set up in the corner of the room. The door opened and Hawthorne walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit anymore. He was wearing a comfortable wool sweater and a pair of jeans. He looked 10 years younger. In his arms, he was carrying Ford, who was giggling and pulling on Hawthorne's ear. "We have a meeting with the international investors in 10 minutes, Verity," Hawthorne said. He sat on the floor near the playpen, letting Ford jump into it with his brothers. "I know," I said, looking over a report. "Are they ready for the new terms?" "They'll agree to anything you say," Hawthorne laughed. "They're terrified of you. They call you the Iron Maid behind your back." "I like it," I said, smiling. "The investors can wait," Hawthorne said, picking up a set of building blocks. "Ridge just built a tower with these. Look at the balance. It's impressive structural engineering. He's going to build cities one day." I watched the billionaire sitting on the floor, playing with the trash he had tried to kick out of his sight. The Sterling curse, the coldness, the greed, the isolation, was finally broken. The sun was beginning to set over the city, casting a warm, golden glow across the office. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows. Below us, the city was alive, and for the first time I felt like I was a part of it, not just someone scrubbing its surfaces. My life had changed in ways I could never have imagined. I went from worrying about the price of a bus pass to managing a multi-billion-dollar empire. But as I watched my 3 sons playing on the floor, I realized that the money wasn't the victory. The victory was the look in Cashin's eyes when he didn't have to be afraid. The victory was the way Hawthorne laughed when Ridge knocked over his block tower. The victory was the fact that Stellan's dream was finally coming true. We were changing the company. We were building the clean energy grid. We were paying the cleaning staff a living wage. We were proving that a bloodline isn't just about the color of your eyes or the size of your bank account. Nobility isn't something you're born with. It's something you earn by how you treat the people who are invisible. I walked over to the playpen and picked up Cashin. He leaned his head against my shoulder and let out a happy sigh. I looked at Hawthorne, who was now helping Ford and Ridge build a new, stronger tower. "We did it, Stellan," I whispered into the quiet room. We weren't just a rich family anymore. We were a real one. And as the CEO and the regent, I was going to make sure it stayed that way. The maid had finished the job. The house was finally clean.